Shalom. Does the Torah teach us history? Are the events that are recorded in the Torah, the people who play an important role in the stories that the Torah tells us, actual historical people who lived at a given time in history? This question has been on the agenda for scholars of all sorts for a long time. And of course, it's very controversial, and uh, committed Orthodox religious Jews have a very strong opinion about this. And one of the areas in which it really comes to the fore is with Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, because even though let's say the historical footprint, as they would say today, of Moshe is enormous, greater than maybe any other individual, there's absolutely no evidence outside of the Torah in the historical record that such a person existed. And this has led to all sorts of strange and theories. One of the most interesting and to this day still controversial and a book on this subject, one which continues to arouse a great deal of interest, was written by none other than Sigmund Freud, the great thinker. It's the biologist of the brain, as he was called by one of my colleagues, the man who sort of invented psychoanalysis, a very assimilated Jew but with a strong Jewish identity, who wrote a book called, in German, Der Mann Moses und die monotheistische Religion, the man Moshe and monotheistic religion, known in English as this simpler title as Moses and Monotheism, a book which he wrote at the very end of his life, after, as a Jew, he had been forced to flee Europe, Vienna, was living in London, and over 80 and on his deathbed, basically. And, well, I'm not going to get into all the details of how this book ties into his Jewish identity and his attempt to find some sort of explanation for anti-Semitism. I just want to focus on the first three words of the title, Der Mann Moses, the man Moses, Ha'ish Moshe, because that is the first, actually comes from our Parsha, Parshat Bo. And I want to talk about that in this video. Now, my opinion, and an opinion which I think is shared one way or another by a lot of people, some great scholars and great rabbis, is the following very simple statement. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu was an historical figure, and the Torah does take some pains to anchor his existence on the historical timeline, as it does in other cases. For example, just to divert for a second, we have at the end of Sefer Bamidbar a long list of place names where Bnei Yisrael camped out in their 40-year journey from Egypt to Eretz Yisrael. Looks like really sort of trivial information, and why should the Torah take up precious space telling us? Well, the Rambam says that there will come a time when someone will say that the events in the Torah did not really happen, they are made up, and so the Torah went to the trouble of actually giving a list of all the campsites on this long 38 or 40-year journey so that we can be sure that it actually happened and we can retrace it if necessary. I would say similarly that the Torah has gone to trouble several times to record Moshe's genealogy, his mother, his father, his sister, his brother, even his lineage back to Levi and Yaakov, to make it clear that this was an historical personage. But that the point of the Torah is not simply to convey chronology, to tell us, just this happened and that happened and this person did that, that person did that. It's to give us very important moral, ethical, religious, legal messages. And so beyond the necessary minimum data to anchor Moshe as an historical personage, the Torah is interested in Moshe as the lawgiver, and so forth. But on several occasions, 3 to be precise, the Torah calls Moshe Ha'ish, the man Moses, the man that Sigmund Freud was trying to find, and he came up with this odd theory that there were 2 people whose identities became merged, and this explains a lot of tension within the Torah and so forth. We're not going to talk about Freud now. We're going to talk about why it was that in 3 places, including our Parsha, Parshat Bo, the Torah goes out of its way to call Moses a man, to speak of Ha'ish Moshe, O Moshe Ha'ish. So the 3 places in which the Torah takes the trouble, it goes to adds the word Ha'ish with to the word, to Moshe's name, are in our Parsha, Parshat Bo, where it says, Gam Ha'ish Moshe Gadol Ma'od Be'eretz Mitzrayim. The man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt. In the story of the golden calf Egel Azav, where the people speak about Ze Moshe Ha'ish, and then in Sefer Bamidbar, after the story where Miriam was saying some of the things about Moses not kind behind his back, and where Moses is called Aish Moshe Vaish Moshe Anav Ma'od, that Moshe was the most modest, unpresuming person who ever walked the face of the earth. Why were these 3 places chosen? Well, first, the 2 cases beyond our parsha, with regard to the last instance, where the Torah says, Va'ish Moshe Anav Mod, it's clear that in giving this moral lesson, where Moses set an example which has never been emulated. I mean, people have tried. We are supposed to try to, meet up to his standard, but the Torah tells us that no one ever did, in terms of being of anavah, of not being proud and conceited. So clearly, we want to point out that this is the man. This is the man that the Torah wants us to know, not the man who went here at 10 a.m. and went there at 12 p.m. and had this for breakfast and all these biographical details that maybe some people would like to see. But the man Moses, what we are supposed to learn about and learn from, was the most humble and unconceited person in the world. When it comes to the golden calf, where the people say, "V'zeh Moshe Aish," we don't know what happened to this man Moses. What I think happened was that the Jewish people, Bnei Israel, were not very respectful of Moshe, but sometimes, as we say, as this sort of folk wisdom, that you don't really appreciate people until they're gone. So when Moshe was there, trying to lead them and trying to get them, into the proper state, the proper spiritual state, the proper disciplined state, they didn't, care too much for what he had to say. But when he was gone, when he went up to Har Sinai, didn't come down for days, then they panicked. And they said, this man Moses, who, we don't know what happened to him, and that led them, to the golden calf. And then we have our parsha, where the Torah says that in addition to all the other things that were going on in Egypt, as the plagues continued and Egypt was more or less beaten into submission, the man Moses was great in the eyes of the servants of Pharaoh and great in the eyes of the people. Now, finally, with regard to the occurrence in our parsha, Va'ish Moshe Gadol Ma'od, I would just like to leave you with 2 insights on that particular verse from 2 great Lithuanian rabbis. The first, someone who lived around the turn of the 20th century, the Meir Simcha Cohen Midvinsk, the Or Sameach, also known as Meshech Chochmah. That's his commentary on the Torah, which he wrote as a teenager. He points out that a typical Lithuanian diuk, fine point in the Torah, that the Torah says first that he was great in the eyes of Dei Pharaoh, and then Bnei Ha'am, because it's a difference to become great in the eyes of Pharaoh's cabinet ministers and scientific advisors at a time when Egypt was the most advanced civilization on earth, and to become great in the eyes of ordinary people, because ordinary people, as we know, tend to idolize or have great respect and great feeling for and great loyalty for so-called leaders or so-called holy men who really have no substance. So to say that the man was extremely popular among the ordinary uneducated folk doesn't really say much about him. But to say that the Pharaoh's advisors, the same Khartoumei Mitzrayim, who were not fazed when Moshe first came in and threw his staff down and turned into a serpent, they did the same thing. These people were not easily impressed. But as the story went on, and as plague after plague came, and Pharaoh looked more and more helpless as HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave one plague after another, Moshe earned his respect. Moshe, who had no fear, walked straight into Pharaoh's palace, knowing that Pharaoh was an absolute monarch, and told him to his face, what he was doing wrong and what he had to do. So to earn the respect, first of all, of Avdei Pharaoh is the important point to make here about Moshe. The other Lithuanian rabbi was the great Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav, who I had the privilege of hearing many shiurim from him. And he makes a point that, this is in ancient times, people were deified. Pharaoh was considered by the Egyptians to be a god, not a human being. And, the Greeks, even after someone, lived and died as a human, they could have, in their temple rites, have this rite where they would, deify him and make him into a lesser god and into a higher god. But the Egyptians, he said that this was the great momentous event here worth recording, that the Egyptians for the first time realized that this was a great man. He was not a god. They didn't have to make him idolize him in the literal sense, make him deify him, make him into a god. He was a human being, but a great man. Ha'ish Moshe. Thank you very much. And Shabbat.